Great class. Over to you, Danielle.
Thanks, Alicia. Just going to hit my record button there and here. All right. Thank you for being here, everyone. Happy Friday. And welcome to our Friday beading class. Today is an earrings / ornament class. It could be a lot of different things. We're getting to that time of year where fast gifts are much appreciated and ideas for fast gifts. So what we have for class today is kind of just a combination earring that you can do in a bunch of different ways. And so here it is in the statement earring / ornament configuration. So you can see it can be stacked up to be together, you know, for a pretty big earring look. And then there's also the option of making each of those components can be separate. So here's just a little mini earring alone. And then you can also just do the hoop, and the hoop is really cool. I like the look of just a single hoop like that for just a really stylish earring. So yeah, we're going to learn how to make these. And then of course there is also, if you have any questions as we're going on, there's of course 1,000 different ways you can spin this and make variations, and we have ideas there to share with you. So I'll get started. On the mat, I've got the beads laid out so far, and I can give you a close-up look at those earrings I just held up. And so what I've got here is the combo, and then the earring, the tiny one by itself. And then here's the hoop one. And so they're made the same way with just one little difference if you want to combine them. And then for beads, what you'll need are seed beads, SuperDuos. So that's kind of the main feature here is the SuperDuo bead. The colors I have out today are just kind of like my Zoom go-to colors because they're bright and they're easy to see on the camera. But the colors that I used in the samples are in the PDFs. And so today I'm just using this turquoise color because it's really pretty. And then the 6/0 seed beads, they're used in the small design, in that one. And then some size 8s, those are used in the hoop. And then also some size 10s, and those are used in both designs. And as are the SuperDuos, used in both. And so for thread, we're going to be using our go-to Wildfire, 0.006, with size 12 beading needles. I always kind of use a size 12 with SuperDuos, just something that I always grab if I'm going to be trying to maneuver through a SuperDuo. But if you're using 10s, I believe a 10 will work as well. And then switching to tools, actually. So we showed the needles. So we're going to need, of course, a pair of scissors to cut your thread, and then some pliers for jump rings and for flattening your thread, so you can thread it easier through your needle. And findings. So for findings, some jump rings and some ear wires. I've got these handy. Anything should probably work. And I have one more bead to show you. So on the small earring, there's one Rondelle bead. It's the same size that we used for, if you guys were in our premium class last week, it's the same size, the 6x4 millimeter Rondelles. And they come on these, there's a couple ways you can get them. On the strand wall, they have these kind of like bundle packs. It's the second to smallest size. This one's missing my really tiny size because we use that in another design. But to show you what a complete one looks like, I've got a few here in other colors. So if you're at Michael's looking at the strand wall, they look like this and they really pop, so it's hard to miss them. So this is the really teeny one, the big one. The one we're using is that second to smallest one, the 6x4 millimeter. You can also get these by themselves. So, you know, 6x4 millimeter comes just a single strand on this design. And that's another way you could find them. So just take a look and see what's there. They are labeled with size on the back. That can be helpful if you're shopping and you're trying to figure out if it would work or not. And there's, you know, there's room for trying something new in this design. I think it would work. It's a forgiving shape in that I do believe if you had something that was just a little different, you know, it'd still work just fine. So feel free to try something you've got in your stash or something that you just like the look of at the shop and see what you find. All right, I think that's everything. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Move these over here. Okay, so I've done something ahead of class just to make life easier for us because you guys don't want to sit and watch me string beads. So the step one, I'm going to come down just a little bit here. All right. Step one of this design, we're going to start with the hoop, which is this one. And step one of it is just a string 30 super duos with size 10 after it. So duo size 10, duo size 10, 30 times. And the length of thread that I cut is 45 inches. So 45 inches of thread, leave about a 10-inch tail. And on my design, what you're seeing here is a stop bead. I did that because these were made a little earlier and I was afraid they'd go flying everywhere. You don't really need a stop bead unless you want one. But so that's what I did. I cut 45 inches of our Wildfire. I threaded a needle on it. And then leaving a 10-inch tail, I strung a combination of SuperDuo in size 10. And I did that 30 times. And so that's where I'm at now. And in the PDF, I'm going to get the stop bead off and I'll show you guys really quick what that looks like. Going over here. So basically step one here. Just doing that 30 times. And so now we're just going to go back to that first SuperDuo bead and then just make a turn. And then you'll note that it says there you can reinforce it if you'd like. And that's good to do. It takes a really long time to go through them all again, but I think it's actually really handy. And it doesn't take as long as it seems like it would, but you have the option of doing that. I'll probably just go through a few here. The thing that I'd recommend if you're going to not reinforce it is just be aware that it's going to be a little loose on you when you're working. All right, so let's pretend I went all the way around. And I'm going to step up into, and anyone who's new to SuperDuos, I know I always forget to introduce a SuperDuo, but to explain what I'm about to do, I'm going to just show you one from the tube here. The SuperDuo beads have 2 holes, and they're a completely symmetrical bead, meaning that when you string them, you don't have to worry about which side you're picking up. You just pick up whichever side you can grab with your needle. And then when you get to a spot like what I'm about to do here, you remember you've got another hole there. And that gives you a way to build out in another dimension. You can just go out, and that's how 3D designs are possible. I love 2-hole beads for that reason. So in this case, I've got all my beads strung. I went back through my first one. I went through a few extra. Ideally, I would have gone all the way around and crossed, but I'm going to turn and go through that top hole. So it's going to put me going in the opposite direction, but it's going to give me the opportunity to work on the outside here. And that's what I was hoping. So I'm going to bring out some size 8 seed beads.
Danielle, it's Carmi.
Hey.
While you're doing that, because you're not stringing on a particular finding, would this be very different if the gang uses 11-0 beads?
I don't think so. I think an 11-0 would probably be okay. I generally tend to use 10s because when we're live, the 11s are, even though they're not a huge difference in size, they're a little bit smaller, and getting through them without puncturing your thread is harder for me on the camera when I'm like, so you'll always see me using 10s, but I think an 11 would be fine, especially if it's one of the coated, like opaques.
Okay. Yes, a bunch of people are going to try it, and hopefully they'll show us how it works out. But a lot of people just have the 11-0s. So guys, definitely try it.
Yeah, I do think it would work. And so what I did is I did a step up. So I call it a step up whenever I switch holes on a SuperDuo. And that's what I did here. And you can kind of see like the thread does show on the side. And so if you're choosing your thread color, Michael's has more than just the black Wildfire. If you're choosing your thread color to match your SuperDuo, that can actually be a kind of cool design element to think about when you're picking out your thread. I usually don't worry about it personally. The thread shows and no one really notices but me. My customers don't notice it. So That's just, food for thought on thread. But there it is. I stepped up and now it's super easy. I'm just going to string size 8 beads all the way around. And it goes pretty fast. You want to go through the outer hole. That's the one you don't have a bead through already. Of every single one all the way around. And so I'm going to just do that really quick. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I made this is different hoop sizes, or the number that I used to string this one was just going for kind of like a more statement look. And I was trying to make it fit my center element. So that's where the number 30 came from. It was just trial and error. I tried to make my center component fit inside of my hoop. But if you're just making the hoop by itself and you're not trying to come along and put the center one, which is what we'll do next, in that case, you don't have to make it 30. You can make it smaller if you wanted to. And it might take less time to create it too. This one's going to take just a minute. And so you see, as I'm working, mine's a little bit loose. It's because I didn't reinforce going around. And I purposely just wanted to show that. So you can decide if you want to reinforce it or not. And, if I wasn't live, that's probably what I would do. And it gets a little faster as you're going all the way around. And if anyone has any questions, now's a great time because I'm just going around the circle. So feel free to jump in, Kermie, if you've got anything.
Danielle, I'm watching the sidebar, and Darlene just asked, a lot of us have a lot of beads in our stash. So how do you find the 10 from the 11 if you don't have any labels on it? Have you ever tried to identify beads by the millimeter?
Oh, yeah. So for example, well, 6/0 beads are easy because those are about a 4 millimeter. It gets more challenging when you're working, you're trying to determine, is it a 10 or an 11?
And I can see on the sidebar, Sharon is mentioning that it's the number of beads that will fit in an inch. So I'm going to recommend to Darlene, if you search online with Google, a ton of people have made charts. Ordinarily, every bead should have the size 10, 11, 8, or 6 on the packaging like we do. Ours are all color coded as well.
Yeah, let me show that. Yeah, and if
So,
you're at Michael's looking for our beads, let me pull out an 11 so you can see what an 11 looks like. Our 11s look like that.
So the colors always stay the same. So if you're looking for 10s, it's going to be the blue label, et cetera, et cetera. So the advice I'll give you today, that definitely search online. You will find lots of little charts that will help you identify the older beads in your stash.
Yeah, and you said that was Sharon that gave the advice of the beads per inch.
Yes.
That is brilliant. I hadn't thought of that before, but that is a really great way to figure it out. Like if you're like me, I used to kind of find things in de-stash groups, and they would often just be from people's like beading stash where it was not labeled at all, just this gorgeous mix of stuff. And to figure out what it is, yeah, I totally relate to that. Okay, so I'm at my last one. I went all the way around. Yeah, it takes a minute, but I thought this was cool. It looks like a wreath to me. So it's a little pretty design there. And you can do this before or after. I'm going to do it now, but I'm going to create a little connection to my ear wire. So to do that, I'm going to get, of course, the ear wire, and then I need a jump rings. And the jump rings I'm using today are just regular 6 millimeter. They're on the strand wall there, or sorry, the findings wall. And I find it helps to do too, just because I like it to hang sort of not necessarily locked in, right? Move a little bit while I'm wearing it if I put an extra couple of jump rings. Here's my ear wires. Get those out of the way. Okay, and so for jump rings, if anyone's new to jump rings, I'll go a little slow through my first one. I look for the seam, and then I get these like square nose pliers, and this is just my jump ring way that I like doing it. But I'll pick it up with the seam facing upward, using these square nose, and then there are also these sparkle bent nose pliers. If you're looking at Michael's, they're the sparkle beetle on sparkle bent nose, and they're really cool. I use them to do this lateral motion. So when I open this, I'm not going to pull the seam apart on my jump ring. I'm just going to laterally open it. So the motion is like that, kind of doing a 90-degree spin. And the reason that's important for this design is we're going to try to put thread through it. And you guys know that can be very frustrating. Thread pulling through your seam on your jump ring is a real problem. If you have closed jump rings, this is a chance where they can shine. If you're using these, just make sure you close them really good. I'm gonna use the click trick. So a jump ring will make a clicking sound when you've connected it. And then I kind of worked it back and forth. I don't know if you guys saw, like I was kind of just giving it some wobble. And that's hardening, work hardening that jump ring. And I'm gonna do that with one more here on the bottom. Little click there. Okay. And so that's probably pretty secure. I think that it's going to be pretty nice. If you were using a closed jump ring, all you would have needed to do is take this bottom one would have been your closed one, and then use an open one to attach to your closed and put your ear wire on there. And so I'm going to bring this back over. And instead of adding another size 8 seed bead in my spot here in this gap here, I'm going to add the jump ring, the bottom jump ring. So just going through that, going through the bead here. And I just went through the next bead there, and that's okay. Make sure it's not crossing. And I think, did I go through the correct one? There, I did. Just a little tangled. I'm going to flip that around. Bring that down. And there we go. That's pretty much it. We need to weave in, and I like to reinforce connections like that. You want to reinforce it. So the first thing I would do, I'm still ignoring my tail thread, is bring up my needle here. Now I'm exiting from that next size 8, and I'm going to use, again, I'm going to take advantage of having a SuperDuo here as a way to turn around. So you want to go through your next SuperDuo bead and then turn and go through the bottom hole of that same SuperDuo. So I'm exiting from this hole, and I'm going to turn and go through this one. And I'm going to keep going as far as it'll let me. And got through the 10 that's next to it, so that's pretty good. I'm going to keep going. I want to pass my jump ring. So I'm going to keep going past my jump ring into the next SuperDuo. So that's the one on the other side of my jump ring from where I'm working. Tight. And I'm going to turn again. Come up through that same hole, and there's another pass through that connection. And I would recommend doing that one more time and maybe turn somewhere different. Maybe come down a couple beads. And this can serve as your weaving in. Anytime you change direction like this, you're tightening and weaving in that thread. So here's another great spot to turn, SuperDuo. I'm gonna turn and go through there. Keep going if I can. Got through quite a few there. That's pretty good. One of the reasons I've got so much maneuverability right now is because I didn't tighten, reinforce my first rows. It'll be a lot tighter if you did that, which is okay, but I just kind of left that to the end. All right. I'm gonna turn again. And there we go. There's my third reinforcing pass through that little connection there. That pesky tail thread is really getting in my way. Okay, and then if you're into knotting and you want to knot it, you could knot. One of the places that I recommend knotting is after you've gone through a SuperDuo, because knots don't tend to be able to pull back through a SuperDuos very easily. So a good place for a half hitch knot, if you were going to make one of those, would be right here, just before the 8, just after a SuperDuo. So pull through, get a loop going there, through that, tighten it, and then bring your thread through the 8. And you know, a few more beads if you want, and then trim. And that'll save you from having to do a bunch of weaving in if you didn't want to. It's already pretty woven in because we used it to reinforce. Okay, so I'm going to remove my needle from this strand here and get my pliers, and I'm just going to flatten the end of it. This is my tail thread. Through this one. Okay. So this one is still hanging out here on the inside of the ring. It's in here with the 10s. It's kind of loose. This is my chance to reinforce some stuff here. So what I would honestly do is go all the way around the whole thing. And I won't make you guys watch me do all of that, but just to get the idea, you just keep going all the way around and try to cross where you were. And when you get there, go ahead and weave in just like we did before. Maybe do a step up into this outer ring, travel along. This step will reinforce your hoop. Every time you reinforce it, the hoop will get stronger and stronger so that it won't be as floppy. Like right now, it's a little bit loose. When you do this reinforcing step around, it'll get tighter. And additionally, with that thread that I had left over here, I could have gone around the outside a few more times. And one other tip I was going to give you was if you put a size 10 here instead of just nothing, that can make it spread out a little more, if it just in case you're using a thin jump ring. Some of my other designs, I think I was using a little bit thicker jump ring. So to give you an example, see this one. And these ones, I must have just grabbed my thinner ones. If you're running into that, just put a little 10 there, that last step. So there's the hoop. And I'm gonna set that aside just for a minute and switch to our other design. So the center one, just this one here. This one is really fast to make. You'll need some SuperDuo beads. Bring those down here. There we go. And then you're going to need, again, just some size 10 beads or size 11 if you're using 11. That should be just fine. There's some of those, there's the little ones. This design uses some 8s, but just a few. So I'm going to leave my 8s out. The place where you're going to use 8s is just here at the top. This little connection right here. And that was just decorative. You could just go with straight 10s here if you didn't want to put those 8s. I just thought it was cute. So those and the Rondelle. So for the Rondelles, let me grab my red ones. I grabbed a strand of these. And again, those are the 6x4 millimeter. And I need some thread. And, you know, 30, 35 inches or so. This one doesn't need a lot.
Danielle, I just wanted to tell you that Cindy also, when we were talking about adding that jump ring and maybe a 10-0, she was just saying 2 11-0s would work. And it'll be perfect because it'll look like a bail.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely try the 2 11-0s for that. I like that idea better. I wish I thought of that. Put that in the handout because that's a good one. Maybe, yeah, if you guys have your handouts handy, make a note in there to add that because I think that's a level up, you know, addition to the design. I get really good ideas here in class. You guys have a bunch of cool things to share. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to string this around, and I know it can be a little hard to see, but in the handout, It's outlined pretty well here, but you're just going to start with the rondelle, and then you string 9 super duos around, and each of those is spaced by a tiny bead. So in this case, it's a size 10 or an 11 if you're using an 11, and then you'll just go back through the the rondelle and the super duo. So let's do that first. I'll show you guys what that looks like. So my rondelle and my super duo. And I'm going to leave, again, about a 7 to 10 inch tail, whatever you're comfortable with. With weaving in, sometimes I think it depends a lot on the needle you're using. If you're using the new needles I'm using, a 10 inch tail is a little easier to wield, I feel like. But, you know, it's experimental. Just try it and see what works for you. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 more here. And you want to end with a duo in this case. It's a little different than the first one where you're ending with a size 10. But in this one, you want to end with a duo. And 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, I'm short one, aren't I? I need one more. Okay. And then come back through the rondelle and back through. And I think I lost a little bit of my tail, so I'm going to gain that back here. And again, you could reinforce it by going back around one more time. And you know, it's handy to do that. This is a small one, so why don't I go ahead and do that just really quick, so we're not working with a wobbly piece. It really only takes a minute, so it's worth doing.
Danielle, while you're doing that, I just want to tell everybody on the sidebar that you made them an extra project PDF to make earrings. And so the only way you'll see it is I'm going to put it up on the sidebar. And if you love what she's doing right now, wait till you see the extra PDF she's made for you.
Yeah, we're doing so good on time. I should be able to show those. The fun thing about them is that, you know, often when we're creating these designs, we at John Bead, we do like a kind of like a down select process. I make a bunch of stuff, and some of it's weird, guys. Some of it's like, oh, wow, okay. And I make a bunch and we look at it all and we're like, oh, we like it. We like it. We think we can put that in an hour. And then we just, you know, we put it together and then I go do the PDF. But there are these two and I was in love with them, but they just wouldn't fit. We just couldn't do it all. And so I had my heart set on them. So I made a PDF for those two, and they're the ones that Carmen was just mentioning. They're in the chat. And you can find them also with the link. And they're just, yeah, just so many ideas. The thing about SuperDuos is when you start using SuperDuos a lot, you get like a lot of ideas, and there doesn't seem to be a limit to it. I keep getting more ideas, but anyway, here's one, one of them. I just went ahead and reinforced. I went through all those again, and then I continued. I went through the rondelle, and I went through the SuperDuo, and now I'm going to do that turn again, where we step up into the outside hole of that SuperDuo bead. And so now I'm going to jump over my rondelle and make a bail. And so to do that, I'm just going to put 2 size 8 beads, and then I'm going to make 4 of my size 10 and 2 the size 8s again. Pretty little color combo there. And on the other side of the rondelle, the SuperDuo top hole, which is open here, and go through that. And now I need my size 6 seed beads, and I didn't pull those out yet. I grabbed these bright yellow lemon ones. And all I'm going to do now is just put a 6 in between each one, going through the open hole of the SuperDuo here on the outside. This one's much faster to make, I think, than the hoop version, but putting them together, it's where some wow happens. Okay, and so now all I have to do is weave in, but before I do that, I want to reinforce my top loop. So I'm going to come along here, reinforce that. And through one of the 6s, go through one more of these SuperDuos and then come up through, I changed holes there. So you just kind of, I did a turn and a spin because I want to reinforce my loop one more time. So I'm going to go through the rondelle, next SuperDuo bead. I think for symmetry, I'm going to go ahead and go down through one more. This is just something I do to match what I did on the other side. And I'm not sure if that adds anything to the design or not, but it's a habit that I've got. Turning in the same place on a symmetrical piece, just kind of, why not, right? Okay. All right, and now just the same thing as before, we can get down here and do a 1/2 inch knot. We could go all the way around and reinforce it. That's more recommended. And thought I would do that just real quick. Okay, when I get over here, I'm going to do that knot again in case anyone wants to see that. So I'm through my last SuperDuo bead. I'm going to do a 1/2 inch knot by going under that thread. So the thread that's exiting from my SuperDuo. And again, these knots don't tend to come through SuperDuos, so it's a great place to do a knot. There's my 1/2 inch knot. I'm going to go ahead and go through all of those. Okay. So I can trim this one. I'm going to go ahead and trim that one. And then the tail thread, I would just want to weave that in and get rid of that. We'll have a piece to work with. I'm going to do a really quick weave in on this one. I'm determined to get this one to go through. It doesn't really want to. Let's try it one more time. There we go. Okay, get on that one. So figuring out where I am, I'm exiting from the rondelle. I'm going to go down through here. And I'll just do a knot here. So I'm going to catch that thread bridge, pull through, get my loop going, and tighten that down. And then I'm going to continue through my bead. You never want to cut right next to a knot. You just want to cut just a little bit down from that. So there's back here. All right. There's that one. It's ready to go. And I'm going to grab a jump ring. And so if this was, let me show you this earring. If this was going to be a earring by itself, I would go ahead and put a jump ring, and a ear wire. So that's really flowy, free moving, just really cool. And it's not too big for an earring. But if you want to do the ornament / statement earring, which was this one, we're going to want to join it. And so I'm going to show that really quick. I have another one of these hoops pre-staged for that. But before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and attach this one on the top of this one. Put that on there. Okay, that looks pretty secure. So I'm going to set this aside for now. We're not going to need it for a minute. I'm going to grab my other one that I hid for myself over here. Here it is. Okay. And I cut this thread way too long, so I'm going to trim that down. I don't know what I was thinking. I was going to make like some epic hoop, but I'm not going to need that much thread. So let's do that. Okay, again, it's got stop beads on it. It's just because something I did earlier. So what we're doing essentially here is we're going back to step one of the first earring. So the first earring, the one with the hoop, we're just headed back to that first step. And I'm going to bring that over and show that again. So what we want to do is we want to attach it here. And so I'm actually going to go ahead and do the two size 10s here, see if that works. 2 size 11s for that part. And then for the inside part, I do think the jump ring by itself will be enough to make that spacing right, because that's what worked for me here. But again, I was using those thick jump rings, so just something to think about when you're playing with it. But before we do this connection here, I'm going to take off that last size 10. Don't need that. I'm going to go through my center one, the jump ring on that one. I'm going to keep going through as many beads as I can, because this is one where I think I'd like to reinforce it. If you guys bear with me, sorry about it. There's lots of weaving on this one. Okay. And so I'm going to go all the way around. I'm just going to do that really fast, just to make it a little stronger. I felt like the last one was a little too loose. And you could, if you wanted to, you could attach it, you know, afterward, but I think that you would have to put a bead there in order for you to get your jump ring over something, and so you'd have to play with those dimensions a little bit. I thought it was easier to just go straight through the jump ring at this step. But I always throw that out there with a disclaimer that doesn't mean there isn't a better way to do it. And you should always, you know, try your idea and see, and then share it, and then share with me if it works too, because I'd love to hear it. Almost there. So just a few more to go through. Okay, and now I'm going to reinforce where I am. Get through that. Okay. So it took a little time, but now I've got 2 threads passing. And I'll probably add a third later when we do our outer ring and we do our weaving in. I'll probably go through that again. So, but there's 2 for now. And it looks all crazy, but it's about to get better. There it is. Okay, so I'm through a 10 right now. I need to go through one more SuperDuo so I can do a turn. Same turn we've been doing. And it doesn't matter where you turn. But I'm going to turn right here. So this is going through that top hole. And now I need to grab the size 8 seed beads again. So for me, there's this emerald green size 8. Go to the top hole of the next one. And we're above this connection now. So I'm gonna grab just a jump ring for now, just for, you know, there not being as much stuff, you know, to worry about hanging up here, but I'm gonna make sure this is closed. I don't like that jump ring. I want another one. Here we go. Okay, that one looks good. Let's try that idea. I'm gonna look, so I am actually using some 10s here instead of 11s, but I'm gonna look through my little pile here for some skinny ones. Let's see how that does. I think that's gonna work great. So I'm putting one, the jump ring, and one is probably gonna move around, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. Go through the next. Let's see what we get. Okay, I think that's good. I'm gonna leave it. Okay, let's put the 8s all the way around and then weave in. And we can see our earring or ornament, if it's gonna be an ornament. Okay. So bear with me, I'm just gonna make a trip around.
Danielle, while you're going around, would you mind telling us what that color of green is that you're using?
Yeah, I love this color. It's the emerald. It says teal green, but to me, it looks truly more emerald.
Thank you. Teal green.
Teal green, yeah. And the, let's see, I was trying to think of a way I could post the link to it. I don't have my little SKUs handout up here with me, but I can post it later. Oh, that's what I'll do. I'll post this later with all of the all the Michael SKUs, so you guys can find every color I've got here. Oops, I went through 2 there. It takes a minute, but it's really pretty. And there was another thought I was having about if you're getting one where your hoops seem like they're just not holding their shape as well as you would like them to, and you have 0.08 handy, that's the next size up of Wildfire. That's another thing you could try. I tend to have 0.006 around mostly, so I that's the one I grab because it's on my desk. And but the 0.08 is probably great for this design too. Yeah, I'm just gonna keep going. Oops, there we go. It's actually firming up really nicely as I go and add these 8s. Yay, almost there. Few more. That's my tail thread there. I'm gonna get that out of the way. Not being make it, yeah. So I've still got my last 8 here. All right, so I'm gonna go through all these beads. So I'm going through my SuperDuo and my 8. I'm gonna go through these next and reinforce that. So for me, just kind of like a recap of what I've done here. With the 210s, it is giving me a little bit of an oval bend, like a teardrop shape, a little bit. So maybe one size 10, if you're wanting to make that firm circle look, would be better, but that's still really cute. I like that. So either way would work. Definitely just experiment. It's something you can easily try and then take out and then go back and fix if you want to play with putting beads here versus not, thicker jump ring, closed jump ring, single bead, 2 beads. Try different combos here, see what you get. Another thing is you could try to mirror it. Then it would just kind of make this neutral. You could do the same 2 here, 1 here. And that might have been another way for me to get a better circle if I put 1 with 2 here. So yeah, definitely try that. Here's how to weave in just real quick and reinforce at the same time. Go ahead and go through that connection here. Do this one on the side and then turn. And here's that promise to trip back through that bottom connection with that jump ring. Should be able to get through that in one swoop, but if not, I'm not going to insist upon it. Ah, there we go, did it. And that's tight, let's pull it. All right, so from here, I would weave in the strand, go all the way around. And then I would take this one and I might use this one to make a turn and then weave the outside. So I could reinforce both the outside and the inside. Do some half hitch knots like we did before, just outside your SuperDuo, and then go through a bead and trim. And then bring on another jump ring and an ear wire up here. Or if you wanted to, you could put a Christmas tree hook and hang it on your tree. This would also be a cool window decoration, like just kind of for some window art. You could put a little hook on it and hang it from window or at the end of wind chimes. There's just a lot of cool things you could do with this airy kind of sunshiny design. And of course, each piece could be its own element. So there's that. And if you're gifting these, I've been making kind of like little earring cards, and this will transition into our showing the other earring. But I'm going to raise up just a little. I was using the print maker again to make little earring cards. And so I came up with, Carmi says I'm a card maker now. I'm having fun. I'm not going to lie. I'm having a good time with these. But happy Thanksgiving. And there's one of the bonus earrings in there. And there's a hoop. And the colors I used here, those are in the bonus PDF because I got asked a lot about this rainbow bronze SuperDuo. It's called rainbow bronze. And I put it with amethyst and iris brown. And wow, it just really pops. So that's another cool thing to do. And then I was really getting carried away. And I wanted the inside of my card to have something decorative too. So I did kind of like a little mini one, little gift. And then the inside is, I doubled it. So see, I put 2 together so you can have a pretty insert. And then I used the print maker to put my gift tag. And there's the other bonus earring. So this colorway and this earring and that other one are in that bonus PDF. It looks like that. And so it's a super easy design. I made myself the ones I'm wearing. And you just use any 6mm bead that you'd like. But if you're loving these drooks that I've got in there, the little 6mm drooks, those are leftovers from our seaside necklace, the last days of summer shell necklace that we did. These are those beads that I had from that design left over. And so that was just another, well, you'll need a head pin for that. So if you're making this one, you just want to grab those. And yeah, so there's 4 earrings and a cool way to gift them if you want to use that idea. I did use the earring punch. Let me show that really quick. All this craft paper too. I got all this craft paper at Michael's in their scrapbook section. And this is my earring punch. They have one for leather backs too. Looks like that. And then last but not least, all those prints that you see, all those little like kind of graphics that I was doing, those are from the print maker. Let me switch it around here. And I demoed that last class. You can catch the demo of this in our class from 2 weeks ago, actually. Last week was our premium class. So this was the class before that, where we did some earrings and we demoed this for how to make your prints in, you know, custom logo, or they also have some built-ins that you can find. Like, for example, this one, that was one of my built-in prints that I used. I think that one's my favorite because I got it to line up right with the paper. So, yeah. Hermie, were there any questions? Should I show next week really quick, or?
Hey, Danielle, definitely. I just want to let you know, I get to read the sidebar and people absolutely love this class. We're all so grateful you gave us a knotting option.
Yeah.
So, all your regulars know you never use a knot. So we fall off our chair seeing that you use them several times today. So thank you for that. And yes, great class. And you have just enough time to just inspire them for what's still to come. Danielle, I did ask if everyone was going to make the earrings for themselves or if they would be gifting or selling. Quite a few people will make them for gifts. So that's really nice. And I'm glad you showed them the card option so that they have an idea of a way to give them away too.
Oh, that's so cool. I'm so glad. Yeah, if I can inspire the holiday gifting for you guys at all, that was my goal, because I know that's a challenging time of year for makers, because people want a handmade gift from us and they're like, oh boy, there's lots of people we have to give gifts to. So yeah, that's where those ideas came from. And this is another one that could be a really fun gift. And I had more ideas for this that will be coming up in other classes, but this is a great way to get started and get the basics for some stuff we're going to be doing next year. This is a right angle weave, and it's a right angle weave with just a little bit of an addition to it. We've made it so that you can put a charm on it. And I made these charms with head pins, but I was at the charm wall the other day, and I did see some charms that are like, they have the orientation of the hole needs to be going kind of, you know, perpendicular to the charm. I saw some that have that. So I will try to get some of those for next week so that I can show you guys an alternative to doing the head pin. If you didn't want to do the head pins, you could also do like with wire, you could do a knotted head pin. I know Beadalon did a lot of classes on knotted head pins. So there's a lot of options here, but what you see here are head pins from Michael's with our seed beads. And I made a bunch of them, and then I just wove them in to my design. And that's next week. This will be really cool. This is a great inklet too for, it could even be a choker necklace. There's so many cool things you can do. Put like a star in the center, just, I don't know. There's so many cool ideas. And it's super flexible. But so yeah, that's what we'll learn next week. And unless is there any other questions for me about today's design or stuff coming up?
No, Danielle, 1 or 2 new people today. So yes, we always have a class on Friday, same time, same place.
We do, yeah. Every Friday. And so I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week, and I wish you a great weekend ahead and happy beading.